Everyone in the room knew one thing about Damien Voss. He never raised his voice. Not when the market crashed and took 3 of his smaller investments with it. Not when a former partner stole a deal from under him and announced it at a press conference with a smile. Not even on the morning when he walked into the boardroom and found that someone had already taken his chair, the one at the head of the table, and placed a temporary nameplate where his permanent one used to be. He had simply pulled out the chair beside it, sat down, and asked if there was coffee. People said different things about that kind of quiet. Some said it meant he was finished. Some said it meant he was afraid. A few, the careful ones, said nothing at all and kept watching. Elena Marsh was one of the careful ones. She had worked as Damien's legal advisor for 11 years. In that time, she had watched him build an empire from a single real estate acquisition that everyone else had called a mistake. She had watched him sit across the table from men twice his age and twice his confidence, and walk away with agreements they still did not fully understand they had signed. She had watched him lose, too, because he did lose, sometimes. And she had noticed that even his losses had a particular quality to them, as if they were temporary arrangements he had already accounted for. She noticed everything. That was her job. And what she noticed, in the months that followed the incident with the chair, was that Damien Voss was not falling apart. He was becoming very, very still. The man behind the chair was Marcus Hale. Marcus was a shareholder, one of the original investors from the early days, when Damien's company was still small enough that every dollar counted. He had ridden the growth quietly for years, collecting dividends and attending quarterly meetings, until sometime in the past 2 years, something had shifted in him. Maybe it was the recognition that the company was now worth more than he had ever imagined. Maybe it was the realization that he had never actually built anything himself. Whatever the reason, Marcus had decided that he wanted more than a seat at the table. He wanted the table. He was charming about it. That was the dangerous part. He did not storm or shout. He made suggestions at meetings that subtly redirected conversations away from Damien. He cultivated relationships with board members over dinners that Damien was not invited to. He framed his growing influence as a natural evolution, as if the company had simply outgrown its founder, the way a house sometimes outgrows its first owner. And people listened, because the company was large now, and large things develop their own gravity, and gravity tends to pull people toward whoever is already in motion. The first formal blow came at a quarterly board meeting in March. Marcus had drafted a restructuring proposal, very professional, very clean, full of language about optimizing executive bandwidth and distributing leadership responsibilities across a broader team. What it meant, in plain terms, was that 2 of Damien's core responsibilities were being removed and reassigned. The vote passed 9-4. Damien sat through the entire meeting without changing his expression. When it was over, he thanked the board for their time, congratulated Marcus on a well-presented proposal, and left before the coffee was finished. In the hallway afterward, Elena fell into step beside him. "Are you going to tell me what you're thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking the coffee was too bitter," he said. She did not press him. She had learned, over 11 years, that pressing Damien Voss was approximately as productive as pressing a wall. The second blow came from someone none of them expected. Sylvia Crane had been with the company for 7 years. She was smart, capable, and had been one of the few people in the inner circle who Damien openly trusted. She ran the strategic planning division, which meant she knew exactly where the company intended to go, what markets, what acquisitions, what long-term plays were already in motion. It was sensitive information, the kind of information that, in the wrong hands, could give a competitor a full year's head start. Sylvia put it in the wrong hands. Later, an internal review would find the trail, coded file transfers, a personal email account, a third-party consultant who turned out to have no other clients except the one competing firm. But by the time the review happened, the damage was already visible. A competitor announced an expansion into 2 markets that Damien's company had been quietly preparing to enter. The announcement used language that was, in places, almost identical to internal documents. When the report landed on Damien's desk, Elena watched him read it once, set it down, and pick up his phone. He made a call. Afterward, he asked his assistant to bring 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. Elena understood, eventually, that the second cup was for her. There were things he wanted her to know, things he was beginning to prepare, and she was the one person he intended to bring with him. The third blow was the one that most people would have found unbearable. Raymond Voss was Damien's younger brother. He was also, as of that autumn, the face attached to a widely shared interview in which he described the company's leadership as stagnant and suggested, without naming names, that certain people at the top had become more interested in protecting the past than building the future. The interview was published in a business magazine on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Raymond was photographed at dinner with Marcus Hale, at a restaurant known for the kind of discretion that people who do not want to be seen choose deliberately. The next morning, a bottle of wine arrived at Raymond's apartment. It was their father's favorite, a specific vintage, from a small producer in the south of France that their father had ordered every year for 20 years. The handwritten note attached said only, "I hope the food was good." Raymond told a friend, later, that the note had made him feel worse than any argument could have. There was a gala in November. It was one of those industry events where the real business happened in the margins, in quiet conversations beside the bar, in the particular way that people arranged themselves in photographs, in who stood next to whom, and who was left standing slightly apart. Damien arrived alone. He was impeccably dressed and unhurried, and he moved through the room with the ease of a man who had nothing to prove, which was either confident or oblivious, depending on how you chose to read it. At some point in the evening, a cluster of board members and executives gathered for a photograph. It was for the magazine that would cover the event, the kind of photo that signals, to anyone who knows how to read such things, who the important people in a room are. Marcus organized it. He did so with the cheerful efficiency of someone who has already decided the outcome. There were 8 people in the photograph. Damien was not among them. He was standing perhaps 4 feet away, holding a glass of water, when the photographer counted down. Elena, watching from across the room, saw the moment clearly. She saw the slight shift in the faces of 2 people near Damien, the flicker of discomfort that people get when they witness something unkind and do not stop it. She saw Marcus glance at Damien once, briefly, and then back at the camera. She did not see Damien's expression change. What she saw instead was Damien, immediately after the photograph was taken, walk over to the group and congratulate them warmly on the quarter's results. He shook hands. He asked one of the board members about his daughter's graduation. He laughed at something someone said. He stayed another 40 minutes, spoke to perhaps a dozen people, and left at exactly the time he had planned to leave. In the car afterward, Elena asked him how he was. "Tired," he said, "but I have an early morning." She did not know then what the early morning was for. She would find out later. What nobody understood, what Marcus did not understand, what Raymond did not understand, what the 9 board members who had voted against Damien in March did not understand, was that Damien had been buying, quietly, methodically, through legal structures that were clean and unremarkable on their own, but which, when viewed together, formed a pattern that pointed in a single direction. He had been acquiring shares in his own company through third-party funds, through agreements with partners in other countries, through transactions that were each, individually, entirely routine. He had been doing it for 14 months. He had said nothing to anyone except Elena, and only to Elena, because she was the one who had to file the paperwork. There was also the Hargrove file. Marcus Hale, in the years before his current ambition had taken shape, had made certain decisions that sat uncomfortably close to the edge of regulatory requirements. Not illegal, perhaps, but the kind of thing that triggered mandatory reviews under shareholder agreements. The kind of reviews that, once initiated, could freeze any vote pending investigation. Damien had known about the Hargrove file for 8 months. He had not used it. He had filed it, carefully, and waited. Elena had asked him once, during those quiet months, what he was waiting for. For them to commit fully, he said. A person who is only halfway certain can still change course. I want them to be completely certain. I want them to have already celebrated. She had understood, then, the particular nature of his patience. It was not the patience of someone who was hoping things would improve. It was the patience of someone who was building something that required the other side to keep moving forward. Every humiliation they handed him was, in his accounting, one more step they took in the direction he needed them to go. The board meeting was called for a Friday. Marcus had sent the formal notice on a Monday, which gave the financial press 4 full days to begin drafting pieces about the end of an era. By Thursday evening, Two major outlets had already published articles describing the expected vote as historic and long overdue. One of them quoted an unnamed source, who said that Damien had lost the confidence of the people who matter most. Raymond gave a brief comment to a reporter, on background, saying that change at the top was probably the right move for everyone. On Thursday night, Damien sent Elena one message: "Be there at 8. Bring the Hargrove file." She did not sleep. She arrived at the office at 7:40. Damien was already there. He was sitting at his desk with a cup of coffee and a printed copy of the shareholder agreement, which he had clearly already read several times. He looked, to Elena's eyes, exactly as he always looked. Unhurried, present. As if Friday were simply the next day on the calendar. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for 14 months, he said. "Today is just when it happens." The boardroom filled slowly. Marcus arrived with 3 of the aligned board members, laughing at something as they came through the door. He was relaxed in the way that people are relaxed when they believe the outcome is already certain. He greeted a few people warmly, took his seat, and set his notes on the table with the confidence of someone who expected to be using them. Raymond arrived separately. He did not look at Damien when he sat down. Damien sat at the table, not at the head. That position was, technically, still in dispute, but calmly, without making anything of it. Elena sat to his left. The Hargrove file was in a folder on the table, closed. Marcus opened the meeting. He moved efficiently through the procedural items, clearly wanting to reach the main vote. He was 2 agenda points away from it when Damien raised his hand. "Before we continue," Damien said, "I'd like to table a filing." His voice was the same as it always was, even, clear, without urgency. He slid copies of the shareholder documentation across the table, 1 to each board member, precisely arranged. The documents showed, with the careful clarity of 14 months of legal work, that his holding entities now controlled a majority stake in the company. The final transaction had been completed at 6:47 that morning. The room did not react immediately. There is a particular kind of silence that follows information that is too large to absorb at once. A silence that is not empty, but very, very full. That was the silence that settled over the boardroom. Then Damien opened the Hargrove file. He did not raise his voice. He did not make accusations. He simply presented the documentation, the regulatory concerns, the shareholder agreement clauses that required a review, the formal notification he had already submitted to the relevant bodies at 7:15 that morning. He noted that under the terms of the agreement, the review process would need to be completed before any major vote could be finalized. He thanked the board for their patience. He closed the folder. He picked up his coffee. He waited. Marcus Hale's face went a particular color that Elena would later describe, to a friend, as the color of a man who has just understood a card game he thought he was winning. He said nothing for almost a full minute. Then he asked to speak with his attorney. Then he asked for a short recess. By the end of the recess, he had submitted his resignation. The terms were agreed upon quickly. There was not much left to negotiate, given the circumstances. Sylvia Crane's involvement in the data leak was formally referred for legal review that same afternoon. The trail that the internal investigation had quietly assembled was now submitted as a complete record. Raymond sat through the rest of the meeting without speaking. That evening, his phone rang. The call lasted 11 minutes. Nobody knows exactly what was said. What is known is that the following week, Raymond released a brief public statement expressing his full confidence in his brother's leadership and his excitement about the company's direction. The statement was awkward. It was also the last public thing Raymond said about the matter. The next board meeting was 3 weeks later. The room was different, not in its furniture or its lighting or the view of the city through the tall windows, but in the quality of attention that filled it. People listened the way people listen when they have recently been reminded that they did not know everything they thought they knew. Damien stood at the head of the table, his nameplate back in its rightful place, permanent and unhurried, and presented a 5-year strategic plan. He spoke for 40 minutes. He used no dramatic language. He did not reference the events of the previous weeks. He simply described where the company was, where it was going, and what it would take to get there. When he finished, he asked if there were questions. The room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the board members who had voted against him in March raised his hand and asked a careful, genuine question about the plan's third-year projections. Damien answered it directly and completely. Nobody interrupted him. Elena sat to his left, as she always had, and watched the room. She watched the way people looked at Damien now. Not with fear exactly, but with the particular kind of attention that people give to something they have recently understood they underestimated. It was not a comfortable look to be wearing. Several of them were wearing it. Outside the tall windows, the city moved the way cities always move, constantly, indifferently, without pausing for anyone. But in that room, something had settled, not loudly, not with any ceremony, just the quiet, final way that things settle, when a question that has been hanging in the air for a very long time has finally been answered. The Alpha King had never gone anywhere. He had simply been waiting for everyone else to figure that out.